Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you on Veteran Voices. Welcome to today's show. Today's show, we're talking with a veteran that's doing big things in the leadership training and development space and beyond. And he's got one heck of a story. You're not going to want to miss this. Quick programming note before we get started here. This program is part of the Supply Chain Now family of programming. Find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you're going to want to subscribe so you don't miss conversations just like this. And, of course, you can search for Veteran Voices anywhere and everywhere you get your podcast from. Hey, let's bring in our featured guest here today. I'm excited to have this conversation with Patrick Nelson, founder of Loyalty Point Leadership. He's also a veteran of the U.S. Army with 39 months worth of combat deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Patrick, good afternoon. How you doing?
Hey, Scott. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, really admire what you're doing. I really respect your background. I'm looking forward to diving more into that and sharing that with our listeners. And as a fellow entrepreneur, some of the things you were doing on social media caught our team's eye, and you've got a ton of charisma and expertise, and I bet companies are just eating it up. So great to have you here.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So let's first, let's get to know Patrick Nelson a little bit better, the human being, before we get into the military and the entrepreneur. So tell us, where are you from, and give us the goods on your upbringing a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from a very small town in the western part of Minnesota, about 20 miles from the South Dakota border. It's one of those kind of you blink and you miss it type towns. No stoplights, no fast food joints except for a Dairy Queen. So not a lot to do around there, but I had a very challenging childhood living out there. But it taught me to be independent at a very early age, which I think has served me very well in my later years.
I bet. So the rural environment, when you say it was challenging as an upbringing, was it just a lack of connection with and being close to friends and folks your age, or what else?
No, it really was a lot of dysfunction in my family. So I was born to, my mother was 19, unemployed, single, living off of government assistance. My biological father wasn't in the picture. In fact, I never met him until about 3 years ago, which is an interesting story in itself because he is an awesome guy. And we have a great relationship. He didn't know I existed until 3 years ago, till the power of ancestry.com brought us together.
Wow.
So it was a challenging situation. My mother eventually had 2 more boys, and then she got married to a guy that had 2 kids of his own. And we grew up in a small house. My stepfather and mother had some substance abuse challenges. So, we saw drugs in the house, and I came out of school one day. I was in the 6th grade. I was walking out, and my mother's getting put into the back of a cop car, getting arrested right in front of the school, especially, when you go to a small school and you're in a small town, everybody knows everybody and everybody's talking about that kind of stuff. So it was very difficult. My youngest brother and I will kind of joke to this day. He likes to say he didn't know what a grocery store was. So he was 8 or 9 years old, because it was always going to the food shelf. Everybody, you get a bag when you walk in, you fill it up with as much food as you can, and that's it. That was kind of our life for a while. And from 6th grade on, I learned, as I said, to be independent. I took care of myself. I bought my own clothes, for the most part, bought my own food. And eventually my sophomore year of high school, I ended up moving in with my aunt and uncle for about a year. And my mother and stepfather took my aunt and uncle to court to get me back. And I didn't want any of that. I ran away for an entire summer, legit ran away, like sheriff's office is looking for me. I was hiding out at a buddy's cabin up on a lake. And, but the middle of my junior year, my stepsister committed suicide in rehab. And I came back down for the funeral, and I saw my younger brothers, and I knew that they needed me, and I never left again until I joined the military, which actually kind of segues, because I came home 3 weeks before I turned 17. And all these guys in my high school were joining the local National Guard unit. and they were telling me like, yeah, we're going to go to Oklahoma this summer for basic training. And I was like, what? Like, I'll get to go on an airplane and you're going to fly me to another state and I can get away from here? Sign me up. Like, that was my total motivation, was vacation, right? And a lot of people don't think basic training as a vacation, but I wanted to get out of the situation I was in. And so that's initially what led me to the military, was sort of the challenges I had as a child.
Okay. So before we get into the military and find out more about your career, I want to back up a smidge, because you shared so much that, I mean, we could set up a 10-hour interview and not unpack it all, but I want to focus and ask you a follow-up question on that reunion with your father after, I think you said he wasn't aware that he had a son until 3 years ago, where some ancestry.com seemed like they stepped in and helped y'all make that connection. Tell us about that, that moment when you both realized the nature of your relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I knew I had a father out there somewhere. He didn't know he had a son. I used to try to talk to my mother about it, tried to get a name. I heard several different names. I heard several different stories from people in the area, extended relatives, some that were very difficult to hear. And so I really didn't know what to think, but one of the names that I was given was a very generic name, Roger Benson. Not very unique. And I'd done some, cursory Google searches on that name, probably while I was in high school, and, not really a ton popping up, or maybe too much popping up that you can't really decipher through it. So I just kind of gave up and didn't think that, it was really going to happen. And, fast forward to after I'm out of the military, I'm back home and I signed up for ancestry.com because I wanted to know what my heritage was. I knew my mother's side. I never knew my father's side. And so I get the results, and, pretty much majority Scandinavian, Norwegian, and Swedish, as I would have assumed. But I didn't know one thing they did on Ancestry was compare your DNA to other people and let you know if you have matches. And so I had happened to log in again well after, looking at my initial report, and it said, you have, 15 potential matches of relatives or whatever. And I started going through them, and most of them were, third or fourth cousin, but one of them said, high probability first cousin. And she had the last name Benson.
Oh.
So, little bells are starting to go off in my mind. But she lived in the Virgin Islands. And so it was difficult for me to make the connection, Minnesota, Benson, Virgin Islands. But I think I had to upgrade my membership on Ancestry so I could message her. I did that, sent her a message, kind of a fire and forget. Didn't hear back. And I think I got pinged on an email like six months later saying, Susie Benson has replied to your message. And I had just wrote saying, hey, here's my story. Do you know a guy by the name of Roger Benson? She said, yeah, that's my uncle, which would make sense if she's my first cousin. And more messages were exchanged. And at the same time, she's messaging him as well. And of course, it's just a complete shock to him. He's like, sounds like a scam to me. And lo and behold, so she was originally from Wisconsin, a little closer to my neck of the woods, and had made her way out to the Virgin Islands. Anyways, she puts him and I in contact via email, and I mean, everything basically lines up. He remembers, my mother. He was in that area. He went to college out in that area, played college football. We pretty much knew, but we went to an independent lab and did a separate DNA test. Like, so we hadn't met yet. And then, we got the results back, 99.999% chance. It's either basically that or zero. They won't give you 100%. So then we met. It was just him and I on the first occasion at a coffee shop, and it was awesome. And he's got a lovely wife he's been married to for a long time. And I have a sister who just graduated college a couple years ago. So they had only child. And we have a fantastic relationship with them. And, we've got a couple girls in our family, so they love being grandparents. And, we all went to Hawaii together last year. And it's just been really, really great. And what's interesting is we only live like 30, 45 minutes apart this whole time. And what's even more interesting is, so he's been a season ticket holder at the Minnesota Vikings since like 1982 or 83, basically when I was born. Well, I used to work for the Minnesota Vikings in football operations.
Wow.
For a season. And so, my job was taking care of players and coaches. He's a huge Vikings fan. So he's at every single game. And I'm, kind of roaming the sidelines before the game. It's like we're in the same stadium, and he's first row on the goal line as well, his season tickets.
Wow.
So it's like, how many times did I walk past this man, my father, and not even knowing it? So just kind of a very interesting story, but a very great guy.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all of that, including some of the challenging circumstances we couldn't get to. But that's great news. That's a heartwarming, a feel-good story, and it's so neat that y'all have found that connection and got to have a great relationship. And now you got a sister you didn't know about, and you've got a relationship there, and so that's outstanding to hear. All right, so going back so we can go forward, clearly the reason you joined the military, it was kind of a parachuting out of the situation you were living in. As you put it, a lot of folks don't look at basic training as a vacation, but you looked at it as kind of your ticket out of the situation is kind of what I heard there. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, Scott. It was a great break from my situation. So I went to basic training between my junior and senior year, came back to high school for my senior year, and I barely graduated. I wasn't a stellar student at all. When I mean barely, I mean they had to create a special class just for me within the last 2 months so I could get a required credit.
Wow. Okay.
In order to graduate. People didn't look at me growing up and say, man, that kid's going to go do some great things someday.
How wrong they were, though. I mean, and we'll touch on that momentarily.
Yeah.
So it sounded like a delayed enlistment type plan. Is that right?
Yeah. That was the plan. So I graduated high school, and 2 days later went back to Oklahoma for my specialty training, advanced individual training, AIT. And, even when I was in high school, I didn't have parents to take me on college visits, help me fill out FAFSA forms, applications, stuff like that. So I got back from Oklahoma in August of 2001 and enrolled in a community college that was in my area. And, 3 weeks into the first semester, I was already skipping classes. So I think it's safe to say I was headed nowhere pretty fast in terms of college. But as you remember, and I'm sure many of your listeners do, that Tuesday morning in September changed all of our lives. And 2 days after the attacks, I dropped out of college and I went regular Army. So I transitioned from National Guard to regular Army. And that took a lot of paperwork and stuff. And so it was January of 2002 when they officially shipped me off to my duty station.
So in the Army, talk about your what you did, your role, your MOS. What'd you do in the Army?
Yeah, so I had to keep the same MOS that I had in the National Guard. They weren't going to send me back to a new school. So I was a 13 Bravo, which is a cannon crew member, field artillery, working on howitzer cannons. And so what's interesting is my very first duty station, they sent me to this small little base in Babenhausen, Germany. It's kind of outside Frankfurt area.
Yep.
And they had a rocket battalion there. And so I shot cannons, which are two completely different systems. And so I get assigned as the colonel's driver, the brigade commander's driver. Now, I didn't drop out of college after 9/11 to drive the colonel around and make sure his coffee was warm.
Right.
So I happened to be at a training exercise there in Germany. And I saw these guys parachuting out of the back of a helicopter. And my first sergeant was standing next to me, and I pointed up and I said, that's the stuff I want to do. And thankfully he had some good connections, and a bunch of paperwork later, I got reassigned down to the 173rd Airborne Brigade based out of Vicenza, Italy. And they sent me to Airborne School, where I became a paratrooper.
Wow, man. All right. So for someone, I was a data analyst in the Air Force, Patrick. So bear with me. But the paratrooper school, where is that at?
Fort Benning, Georgia, and it's
Oh,
3 weeks long.
I should know that. That's not, not too far from where we live, 2 or 3 hours away. What so what was the toughest thing about successfully navigating through and graduating that program so that you could, do what caught your eye, jumping out of planes and fulfilling the whole reason you joined the military?
Yeah, I think that honestly the toughest thing was, so this is February of '03 when I got sent to Airborne School, and I was afraid that my unit was going to leave me behind and they were going to go to Iraq without me. So that was the toughest thing. I just wanted to get it done.
Mm.
I think anybody that says they're not scared when they jump out of airplane is a liar. So I definitely was scared every single jump I did. You definitely have that feeling. I'd say honestly the hardest thing. So I was in shape. I mean, you're in the military and everything, but your body kind of takes a beating when you're practicing what they call a parachute landing fall, a PLF. And so I can still remember to this day, like after practicing all day on this contraption known as a swing land trainer, the next day you go in formation and it just smells like Bengay and icy hot because everybody's so sore. It's like after the first day of football practice of tackling with the pads on. And so that's something that I definitely remember, kind of battling that soreness. And what a lot of people don't know is about paratroopers in the military. It's not like a skydiver where you kind of come in nice and soft and you land on your feet. You're falling 18 to 22 feet per second when you're under the canopy. So it's a pretty hard landing.
Is that, again, bear with me because this is a foreign territory. You want to get from the plane to the ground in as fast of a speed that you can survive so that you're not basically an exposed target. Is that some of the thinking there?
Yeah, absolutely. You're jumping from maybe 1,200 feet above ground level, if not lower. You're hooked to a static line. So ideally your parachute should open within 4 seconds of you exiting the aircraft. You just want to get in the ground and do your mission.
All right. So fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So as you graduated Airborne School and as we laid up front, 39 months of combat experience in theater in Iraq and Afghanistan, before we talk about some of your favorite people you worked with and those may work for you and folks maybe you reported to, tell us about give us some anecdotes of your combat experience, especially as it relates to you as a paratrooper.
Yeah, absolutely. So fortunately, I graduated Airborne School and I got back and they were prepping to go to Iraq. We were getting all the vehicles, everything ready. And so on March 26, 2003, elements of our brigade conducted the largest mass combat parachute jump since the Vietnam War into northern Iraq. It was more of a diversion than anything. Most of the other troops were coming up from the south. Saddam had anywhere between 11 to 13 Republican Guard divisions up in the north. We wanted to sort of keep their attention up there so they didn't go reinforce the units in the south. We were supposed to have 2 artillery sections jump in out of 6 that we had in our unit. My section was one of them. So I just got back from Airborne School and now I'm going to go parachute into Iraq. Unfortunately, they scratched those, I think like 36 hours before the jump, because what you often think of Iraq, you think deserts, but northern Iraq, grass and mud. And the landing zone was just so much mud. They said our howitzer cannons would have taken us 3 days to dig them out. So we did not end up jumping. I arrived the next night after the infantry guys had secured the airfield. We landed the next night by C-17 and got rolling on our missions. And I was part of the first elements from our unit to fire a round in combat since the Vietnam War. We conducted 2 artillery raids behind what's known as the Green Line in northern Iraq with the Kurdish Peshmerga on April 6th and April 8th, 2003. So that was sort of my first taste in combat. I was 20 years old and it was wild.
Gosh, we had a Congressional Medal of Honor winner on a previous episode that really It's been, when you hear combat firsthand, especially, if you haven't been in combat like me, to hear some of the frank stories and the decisions you got to make there in the moment in the fog of war, it's very powerful and compelling. And for you, when did it, you were just talking about kind of your first experiences. When did combat first, the challenge of combat, the human toll it takes, when did that, at what point did that hit you?
I don't think it was until we lost our first soldier via combat, and that was end of July 2003, and it was a friend of mine from my unit, a forward observer, Justin Hebert, from Washington State, and he was killed when they were ambushed. And, that obviously really hit home. Up until that point, we transitioned from, you sort of had the more traditional war, I guess, if there is a such thing. And then there was sort of a lull, and then the insurgency started picking up. And I think we were very fortunate at first, but then, when that happened, that's when things really kind of started to be a little more real. I think at first felt like, you kind of had that feeling like you're bulletproof, almost like, oh, nothing's going to touch us. And eventually it did.
Well, years and years later, certainly thoughts and condolences and huge debt of gratitude to the Hebert family and all the other folks that served with, lost so much national treasure over the last 20 years. All right, so let's move right along. On a much lighter note, we all in service, I bet, in combat, the people you work beside, that you're in the trenches with, regardless of which way, who's reporting where. Talk about some of those folks that you serve with that really, you'll be telling your grandkids about down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next deployment I did was for 12 months, and it was my first one to Afghanistan. And our platoon leader was this lieutenant by the name of John Post. And he had graduated out of West Point. And there's, I think, a certain stigma against officers that come out of West Point. But John is somebody that is the epitome of a servant leader. Even for somebody so inexperienced as a platoon leader, a new lieutenant, this is the type of guy that could sit you down, and I saw him do it with soldiers, and just tell you the 12 different ways you sucked at life. But you'd leave that conversation with a smile on your face, ready to charge up the proverbial hill for that man. You knew he was going to be there right by your side. He was going to give you every single resource you needed to succeed, and he was going to be your biggest cheerleader. And that's somebody that I've really modeled a lot of my leadership behaviors off of, is John Post. And now he's he went on to become a Green Berets and is serving as a battalion commander within Army Special Forces right now.
Wow, man. I love that. In the same conversation, he could tell you all your deficiencies and leave you amped up, ready to run through walls. That must have been a very unique leader. Who else really sticks out like the then Lieutenant Post clearly did?
Yeah, and another great one is a guy by the name of Greg Trent. And so Greg and I went to Iraq together. After Iraq, we came back. Greg went to Special Forces Assessment School, which is basically 3 to 4 weeks long, that you have to be accepted just to get into Special Forces School. And Greg passed. And so he came back to Italy where we were stationed. He was waiting on his school assignment date, and we got orders to go to Afghanistan. And so Greg said, you know what, I'm going to push back my Special Forces School. I want to deploy with you guys again. Everybody always kind of talks about the family and the brotherhood that you form. And in Afghanistan, though, they assigned Greg to our headquarters element, kind of keep him off the front lines and everything. And he did a great job of taking care of us. And, I had got wounded early on in that deployment, and I was back there at Bagram Airfield healing up. That's where Greg was based out of. And I had the opportunity to return to Italy to recuperate, or I could stay there at Bagram Airfield. And, I didn't have a family at the time or anybody to return home to. So I just kind of hung out there at Bagram Airfield for about 3 weeks. And Greg had a conversation with me. He said, "Hey, you need to get back out there with your guys. They need to see you. The last time they saw you, you were getting loaded on a helicopter. We had some soldiers that were killed." He's like, "It's important for them to see you." I was a newly promoted sergeant at that time. So Greg was giving me some great advice. And so he was in charge of like the helicopter manifests and different things like that. And so he snuck me on a helicopter, even though I wasn't technically supposed to fly yet. And I got to go back out there with my soldiers. And it was an awesome opportunity to be able to get out there. I couldn't go out on any missions or anything right away, but just being there with the guys, I think was a very big morale booster. And anyways, we got back from that Afghanistan deployment. Greg went on, earned his Green Beret. And unfortunately, he was killed in an ambush in Afghanistan in 2012, August 2012, while operating with his Special Forces team.
Wow. So you mentioned you were wounded.
Yep.
Tell us more. How did that happen?
Yeah. So June 8th, 2005, we were operating out of a small forward operating base on the Pakistani border. And we had 2 artillery sections out there supporting some special forces, Navy SEALs, and some of those other government agencies. And every time we'd get resupplied with the helicopter, one of the artillery sections would stay back in case they need to provide fires. The other one would be tasked with downloading the helicopter. This specific morning, my section was tasked with staying back, watching the radio. The other section was going to go download the helicopter with some ammunition we were getting resupplied on. It was June. Snow was melting in the mountains. Fighting season was picking up. And I headed over to help the other section because they had a sergeant leaving on R&R. So I was going to backfill that position for them. And I'm over there kind of hanging out, and my buddy Luke and I are talking, and we heard the sound of a Chinook helicopter coming in. So we got in a Humvee, and right at the last second, my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, hopped in the back. Now, he was supposed to be back there with our section. And so I turned around, and I was going to yell at him, but I thought for a second, you know what, he's shown the kind of work ethic that I value in soldiers. Like, he wants to come lift some heavy boxes. I know that our guys will be just fine without him and I. So I didn't say anything. And as I was turning around, I realized he did not have his helmet on. And so I literally opened my mouth, but then realized I didn't have mine on either. And it's kind of hard for me to say something if I'm not doing the right thing. We got out to the landing zone. A group of 10 of us stepped to the side of the aircraft because they had to take the machine gun off the back ramp. The guy was having a little difficulty getting it off. And my platoon sergeant handed me a piece of paper with some serial numbers to items we were expecting. So I grabbed that piece of paper and I turned my back to this small circle because I started ground guiding Luke, who's in the Humvee, get him closer to the back of the helicopter so it's not too far of a walk with these heavy boxes. And the next thing I remember, I was, picked up and just slammed right on the ground. And no idea what happened. I look up, I see blood, I see bodies. The helicopter powered down, and I heard the distinct sound of an incoming rocket. So I quickly got up. I dove underneath the Humvee for cover as rockets impacted all around. As soon as the barrage ended, I crawled out from underneath, and I started running back to the guys that were still on the ground, kind of unsure of what I was going to find. And as I was running, a Marine that was on our base yelled to me that I'd been hit. Up until that point, I hadn't felt any pain. And, you always hear about the adrenaline and stuff like that. And I turned my head and I looked at the back of my uniform, and it was shredded and blood was pouring out. And it was like that instant, the pain just hit me. And so they loaded us into whatever type of vehicle they could find, brought us to this Afghan clinic that was within our base. The local Afghan doctor would see locals from there. And now my wounds were very minor compared to everybody else. I got peppered in the back with shrapnel. I still have a few souvenirs in there that I took home with me, but compared to everybody else, I was pretty good. So I got bandaged up real quick by Luke, and I started, trying to see who else was hurt, what was going on. I was pretty much in shock, had a lot of confusion. And that's where I saw Michael Kelly, a supply sergeant, and he's laying on this elevated stretcher. And that local Afghan doctor who worked in the clinic was sitting on this red milk crate, and he's performing CPR on Michael. And I do a quick lap around the clinic, see who else is hurt. I see my platoon sergeant, the one who just handed me the piece of paper with the serial number. The femoral artery in his leg is severed. Other severe wounds to his abdomen and his arm. And I come back around to Michael, and he's now on the ground, and they're zipping him up into a body bag. And it wasn't more than 30 or 45 seconds. And then I make my way into this small room in the clinic, and that's where I find Emmanuel laying on a table, unconscious. His head is bandaged, people working on him, but I could see his chest, rise and fall. So I knew that he's breathing, and grabbed his hand, just told him, hey, everything's going to be okay. Medevac helicopters arrived, brought us all to forward surgical teams. They removed a bunch of pieces of shrapnel from my back. A couple of them were too deep. They left them in there, sent me back out to the landing zone for another helicopter ride to Bagram Airfield for more advanced care. And as I was waiting there, my commander approached to see how I was doing. And I told him I was going to be just fine. And I, of course, asked about Emmanuel, and he said he was going to be okay. And I just felt such relief. And, he turned to walk away, and he got about 3 or 4 steps, and he turned around and tears were coming down his cheeks. And he said, I'm sorry that I lied. Hernandez didn't make it. And, I just dropped to my knees and I lost it. He died because I didn't have the courage to speak up and say something. He took shrapnel right through his head. I wasn't doing the right thing as a leader. And, I beat myself up for a long time after that. And, I tried to drink the problem away, tried to wash it away with pills. Obviously, none of that helps. It only serves as an accelerant for other mental health challenges you might have. But I've learned that I can take that story and I can impact the future. I can influence it. And so I've taken that story and I share it with others. One, to share about my heroes, but to also let them know the differences that we can make in people's lives. Sometimes the smallest acts of service can have the biggest impact, and you will never know if you don't do it.
I really appreciate you sharing that. It boggles my mind how fortunate we are that those that have never been called to serve in combat, and we complain about the stupidest things, and I'm guilty as charged. I'm pointing at myself. And to hear these wartime experiences of real challenge and stressors in life, and the immense sacrifices that folks like you make, it blows me away each and every time. I really appreciate you sharing, Patrick. Let's talk about. We're going to talk about what you're up to now here in a few minutes. But first, 39 months in combat, hearing some of these experiences here, I can only imagine all the accomplishments that we can't get to here today. But what's 1 or 2 accomplishments? You've kind of already shared a couple lessons learned that clearly apply in what you do now. But what else would you point to that you really hang your hat on, that you're really proud of what you and your team were able to get accomplished?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I finished 2 years of college while I was in the Army. After I got wounded and I got back out there with my guys, I couldn't go out on any missions. I couldn't wear any body armor. I still had stitches in me, still on pain pills. And we were fortunate to be working with Special Forces and Navy SEALs. So we had fast internet, even though we're living in mud huts on the Pakistani border. So I started plugging away at online college classes. And between my 2 Afghanistan deployments, my next one was 15 months long. I finished all my general studies, and I was really, really proud of that. First one, from my family to, complete any type of post-high school education. And so, yeah, so that's
while you're in combat, Patrick, holy cow, huge accomplishment. How in the world do you do it?
Yeah, it was interesting. We'd get done, all night shooting fire missions or something like that. And all the guys would rack out, and I'd have to stay up and write a paper or something. It wasn't the traditional college experience, but nonetheless, something that I am so glad that I did, because it really set me up for success once I got out.
Outstanding. Okay. Now you just, it's like you're reading my mind where we're going next. Perfect segue. As you got out, let's talk about your transition. This as we were talking pre-show, this is, since I got out in 2002 and then I've gotten in the industry and have had countless conversations with veterans that have had a wide array of experiences when it comes to transition, oftentimes extremely challenging. The good news is employers have gotten more serious with real action, not lip service, around trying to understand that transition, trying to understand what they experience in the military, and trying to get them on board and give them jobs and giving meaningful work, which is kind of been the second or third wrinkle here in recent years. But still, we've got no shortage of challenges and really improving that transition experience. Let's talk about yours. So what year did you exit the Army active duty?
Yeah, so I left the Army in December of 2008, and January 2009, I was sitting in a college classroom with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids.
So let's see, Lornette Vestal came on a few episodes back, and he talked about how when he exited, and he also had combat experiences, how difficult it was to find friends and folks that could relate to and kind of, foment those relationships. How challenging was that in terms of your transition, kind of going back as you've been, 18, 19-year-olds and you've been 40 months in combat?
Yeah, it was, I'd say it was non-existent. I didn't really make a lot of friends in college. I wasn't there for the social experience. I'm not a very book smart person. I've had my IQ tested. I'm not very intelligent, but I got A's in every single college class I've ever taken through 2 master's degrees, except for one. And again, it's not because I have this high intelligence. It's amazing what you can do when you focus. And, I wasn't searching for the next party that night. I knew that I needed to get this right the first time. So I really applied myself, and it's amazing what you do when you do the readings. You do what the teachers tell you to do, how successful you can be. Right. And so I wasn't out, trying to make a lot of friends. I was just ready to take on this challenge and complete it. I got out and I started looking for jobs, but late 2008, early 2009, not a good job market for anybody.
Right.
And I applied for over 70 different jobs, and I didn't get one single call back. These were all jobs that were hiring, jobs that I could do while I was in school. I'm talking about like everything from selling insurance to, Walmart, McDonald's, different places like that. And I didn't get one single call back. And it was tough at first, but I think it just fueled me even more that I had to be successful at what I was doing. And so my first job outside the military was watching children jump in an inflatable football helmet at the Minnesota Vikings training camp. I was hired as a marketing intern. And it was funny, the very first day, the person in charge was basically another intern. And he's going down this clipboard telling us where we've been assigned. And he gets to me and he says, you need to go watch the kids jump in the football helmet. And I was 26. I definitely felt a lot older than I did. Looking back, 26 is still very young. But I had all that time in combat. I had a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, all the time leading soldiers and responsibility I had. And now I'm relegated to watching the kids jump in the bouncy house. And that was a big wake-up call for me, understanding that, hey, you're basically starting over, and you need to prove yourself again. And I think I did that. And eventually, I ended up, as I alluded to earlier, working with the Minnesota Vikings in football operations. At the time, what I thought was my dream job. Turns out it wasn't, but it still was an awesome experience.
So touch on a minute on that more, elaborate a little more on that. I think one of the challenges we've certainly seen as it relates to jobs for veterans, and it's gotten a little bit better, but a few years back, there was a lot of reporting around the underemployment of our veterans. And we all know the challenges we're seeing with our veterans and from a mental health standpoint and far worse. Right. I've always thought that, even though the numbers have gotten better and support seems to have become more serious, where there's resources being invested by corporate America, still soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, we've got a strong sense of duty, and you want to produce, right? You want to be part of the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what you spoke to there, if you're in a job that's below your experiences, it can be deflating, to put it mildly. Speak more to that, and have you had any other conversations where that's still a big issue out there for veterans? And
sure, yeah, absolutely, Scott. So first of all, I just want to say, and I know that you know this, we're fortunate with the resources we have. I think back to the Vietnam veterans, Cold War era veterans, and obviously ones well before that, and the lack of resources they had.
Great point.
It's still not good enough with what we have now. We know that, but I try to keep things in perspective as much as I can. Yeah. And we are pretty fortunate. Back when I got out in 2008, it wasn't great. It's gotten better, but again, it's still not where it needs to be. And I think the idea of finding meaningful work, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because one of the things I struggled with the most was finding that purpose again. So when I joined the military, I, post 9/11, signed up for all those patriotic reasons. But when I was in, it was just another job. You don't really think about that patriotic and duty stuff when at least I didn't. And, it was just another job. It's like, you might be a car salesman, and well, I'm a soldier, and I don't work 9 to 5. I get up a little earlier, but that's just my job. And it wasn't until I got out and I'm in the civilian world and I start reflecting on my experiences and what I did and realize, like, whoa, that was something much bigger than myself that I was part of. And so I'm trying to think, like, how am I going to, replace this sense of purpose that I had? And I realized after a while that I couldn't replace it, as far as like duplicate it exactly. I never was going to be able to do that same exact thing again. However, that didn't mean that I couldn't find a new purpose. And so eventually I ended up creating this nonprofit organization called Real Combat Life.
Did you say create it? You founded a nonprofit? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's correct. And so it's not up anymore. I had taken it down. It started out as an individual blog. It was realcombatlife.com. It was a chance for me to share my stories in writing. A lot of people always had questions. They didn't really know how to approach it either sometimes, and that's no fault of their own. But a lot of times wasn't ready to talk about it yet. And so I just sort of started writing things down and would direct them here. Hey, go check out this. And, I was also motivated by the sense of, I'm a huge fan of history. It was one of my majors, and, documenting those stories so I can remember them and share them with my family when I get older. And it was very therapeutic for me. And so I, invested a little bit of my own money and opened it up to other veterans to submit and share their stories. And then I ended up winning this $25,000 grant from Pepsi.
Wow.
And so Pepsi one year, I was called the Refresh Grant. Instead of purchasing a Super Bowl ad, they were going to give a bunch of money away. And so to people with good ideas. And so you had to submit your idea online, and then the public voted. And they were in all different types of categories. And, I was a kid with a website. I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't a grant writer or anything like that. And it was a total grassroots, like, social media initiative. And I'm going up against these large nationwide organizations like the VFW and the American Legions that are competing for these grants. And I end up in whatever top percent of the voting, and I won. And so, I used that money to invest it even more. And again, opened it up to more veterans. And I ran that for a while I was going to school. And it got to be a lot because it was just me and a couple volunteers. And then once I got done with college and got into the workforce and looking for jobs and stuff, that became more and more difficult to keep up. And so I just kind of let it go. But it was a great opportunity. And I know that there were a lot of veterans who got to share their experiences in writing, some that, I'm still in contact with. I actually just messaged one yesterday and shared a video with him that him and I have never met. He's a former Special Forces soldier down in Iowa. But it was, great to make those relationships with other military men and women.
So clearly you've got founder dynamics, founder DNA. We'll touch on your current entrepreneurial venture in just a minute. Let's pick your brain. I want you to be a consultant to those that are getting ready to transition or in the throes of their transition, what are a couple pieces of advice you would share with folks?
Yeah, obviously have a plan and understand that just like any plans in the Army, they're going to change. I had seen so many guys get out that didn't have a plan. They get out and say, I'm going to take a month off, I'm going to go to school or something, but it never happens. So before I'd even got out of the military, I had already signed a lease on an apartment. I'd bought a car because I was stationed over in Italy and everything. So I had a car waiting for me. I already had applied and been accepted to college and already had one scholarship lined up. So if I wouldn't have had that plan, it would have been much more difficult. And then another thing, don't just sit around. You got to do something. I mean, yeah, take a little break maybe for a week, but you can't just sit around and play video games all day as much as you want to. Get out there, be proactive, and surround yourself with the right people that have your best interests in mind, the John Posts in your life, right? Not people are going to be the yes men or women. They're going to tell you what you want to hear, but those that are going to tell you what you need to hear. And also use your benefits. So many get out and don't use their education benefits, and some are able to transfer them to dependents, and that's great. Others don't have that based on their time in service. And honestly, I think you're a fool if you don't use them. Even if it's, you're working full time and you're taking just like one class here and there, utilize those benefits. They're there for a reason.
Love that. Going back to having a plan and taking action, for some reason, as you were sharing, I was thinking of my out processing checklist, and those can be pretty long, and how when I first got it, how overwhelmed a bit I was. But, just knocking out a couple bites of an elephant day in and day out while you knock out whatever your charge is for the day, a couple bites of elephant, right? And before you know it, you've eaten a 3-ton animal. So, all right. So let's talk about now what you're up to now with Loyalty Point Leadership. And I love, clearly, you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, and it's always interesting to see all the different places that can come from. But speak about the genesis of this venture and what you're doing.
Yeah, Scott. It's interesting you say that, the entrepreneurial spirit, and I see how you could think that, but I honestly never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. Like, I never had any desire to start my own business. Absolutely none. I think I had a lot of fear behind it. Like, how do you do it? Wanting to make sure I was on the up and up as far as taxes and legalities and stuff. I let all that kind of cloud my judgment. But the real genesis of this is February this year, while COVID was still in its infancy, I lost my job. It's a job I had for 5 years. It took me all over the world doing some awesome work, leadership development work. It sent me back to school. I got another master's degree in organization development from Pepperdine. And February I get let go, and my wife and I, we're in the middle of the adoption process right then. We had just went through what's known as a failed match in the adoption world, which is we lost out on $15,000. The birth mother we were matched with was basically scamming us in the agency. And it's a risk that we knew going in. Of course, you never think it's going to happen to you. But more than that financial investment, it was the emotional investment that was very difficult for us. So I lose my job, and we have to decide, are we going to continue this adoption journey? We had already been on it for about 11 months. Do we want to continue when I have no financial security? And after a lot of prayerful consideration, we did. And we brought home a beautiful daughter at the end of May. But so I get the news on the phone, hey, you've been let go. The writing was sort of on the wall, so it wasn't a huge shock. But I cried again, because I had no idea how I was going to provide for my family. And so after wiping away those tears, my wife and I were sitting right down here in my office and just sort of chatting and talking about our feelings. And I log on to the Secretary of State website here in Minnesota, and I create an LLC. And I'm off and running. Really, honestly, no idea what I was doing. kind of like the blind squirrel, right? I'm just kind of feeling my way around, trying to figure things out as I go, reaching out to any resource and contact out there that I think can give me any bit of advice. And honestly, I've just been very proactive about it. I knew I couldn't stand by and just wait for the phone to ring itself. I had to get out there and sort of beat the pavement, even in a virtual world. And so that's what I've done. And I think a lot of people, they can kind of reflect on situations like this. It's been a huge blessing in disguise. It certainly has not been without its challenges. And it's still very challenging. We're struggling. But at the same time too, I keep it in perspective. It could be a heck of a lot worse. There are people who have it much worse than I do. All of us are being impacted by this. So I'm just going to keep doing what I do every single day, and I'm going to make it work.
Okay. So let's talk about what the company does that you formed. You're in kind of startup, early stage mode. Every business goes through it. So know that you've got a lot of kindred spirits out there in the entrepreneurial community. But so what's the main thrust of the business?
Yeah, so Loyalty Point Leadership, it's the one-man shop. It's me, Patrick Nelson, and I'm a leadership development consultant. I'll partner with organizations to offer leadership development training that I facilitate, and a lot of it really is rooted in my military experiences. I look at behavior or leadership from a behavior standpoint that, leadership's not a position or title. It's not, we expect it out of people who are bosses, but you don't always get it. I think all of us could point to somebody that we've had as a manager and be like, no, that person's not a leader. And in the military, one of the most, as you know, bureaucratic organizations out there, you wear your rank on your uniform every single day. Everybody knows exactly where you stand in that hierarchy of command, but yet you can still find leaders at every single level. And even the lowest ones, and they're not in charge of anything. Well, what is it that makes them a leader? It's their behaviors. It's their actions that they demonstrate. Oftentimes I'll have people say, I'll ask them like, hey, describe to me a perfect leader if one ever existed. And they say, well, they're empathetic and they're a good listener and they're fair and honest and integrity and they motivate people and vision, all the stuff we know.
Right.
Well, those are not exclusive to being the boss or being in charge of people. It's not like, all right, Scott, now you get promoted. Now you need to be a good listener. Right. Now you need to start being empathetic, right? Anybody can do that with the right development and training and experience. And so that's one thing that I try to bring to organizations is helping them sort of get through those misconceptions of leadership and bringing it from a behavior standpoint. And also now what I've been focusing on a lot is just using my story to inspire others. I found that, during these challenging times we're in, not a lot of people are looking for that leadership development training, which I can certainly make an argument for. It's needed now more than ever. But a lot of companies are kind of slashing those training budgets, right? And I get it. But there's a very strong need for some inspiration out there and a positive message. Employee engagement is down across the board, across industries, and that's impacting the bottom line. And so I've really been focusing on trying to, hop on Zoom calls, any type of virtual event, and just bring my inspirational message, that's rooted in leadership, and also that I pride myself on bring some practicality and some sustainability behind it. Because you can bring in a lot of people that will entertain a crowd and they'll tell a good story and maybe tell a few good jokes, but it's kind of like a sunburn. It wears off after a few days. So again, I pride myself on not only bringing that great story that's going to inspire people, but leaving them with something that they can actually take away, start implementing, and have some sustainability behind it.
Love it. Patrick, you say you're not a smart guy. I completely disagree with you. I think you're extremely intelligent. You're proven, you're experienced. What you're sharing with organizations has worked, right? It's been proved out. So undoubtedly you've got some huge months ahead. And I'm so glad you shared some of your story here today, because folks need to hear you. You've got a lot of uplifting. Hey, it's not that bad. Let me tell you about some stuff that's really bad.
Right.
Or even better, here's some things you can do to better empower your workforce, to be a better leader, to change the trajectory of your team or your organization. So looking forward to big things coming from Loyalty Point Leadership. And, you know, I also share this with you. So we're on our fourth venture as an entrepreneur. I wouldn't change it for anything else in this entire world. And it started with me getting fired, and it started completely blindsided. There was no writing on the wall. I was doing something I should have never been doing. Miserable. And I don't think I ever would have jumped out and formed on my very first venture unless I got kicked out of the tree, off the limb. And while that was a whole bunch of suck for a long time, we're now building a multi-million-dollar business and beyond because of that really bad day. And we had a family. I had my third child was on the way, and I can relate so much to what you're sharing. You're going to break through, and you're going to do big things, and it's going to be the best thing that's ever happened to you. So I'm so glad we connected. Let's make sure that we can get you connected with our audience. So how can folks connect with you, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, LinkedIn, Patrick Nelson, look for me under Loyalty Point Leadership. You can also find me on Instagram. Recently joined the Gram after some advice from Bobby Bones. He said, you got to get on Instagram, man. And so Patrick J. Nelson, 1983 I'm on Instagram. And and the website, obviously, loyaltyleadership.com, loyaltypointleadership.com.
We're going to make it really easy. We're going to list those things in the show notes. We're all after that one click. It's what we try to offer our audience to make it really easy to connect with our guests. And I've got, there's going to be no shortage of folks, I'm sure, want to compare notes and hear and engage with you firsthand. So Patrick Nelson, you got so much to share. And that's just what we were able to get through over the first hour. So we'll have to have you back later, maybe as we get into, thankfully, 2021, right?
Yes, sir. Anytime.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending some time with us here. To our audience, hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I have. We've been talking with Patrick Nelson, founder of Loyalty Point Leadership, and again, a veteran of the U.S. Army with 39 months worth of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I bet thousands and thousands of stories we couldn't get to today, but hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hey, on behalf of the entire team here at Veteran Voices, we invite you to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Better yet, if you got a story to tell, reach out. We'll try to work you into our programming schedule, and we'd love to make that happen. On behalf of our entire team here at Veteran Voices and Supply Chain Now, this is Scott Luton signing off for now. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed, be like Patrick Nelson for sure. And with that said, we'll see you next time here on Veteran Voices. Thanks, everybody.